Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show in which I, Matt, the Gameboy, will talk you through the highs and lows of the Gameboy library. This week we'll be looking at a port of my favourite game ever, it's Bubble Bobble. For a lot of people, being asked what is your favourite game is an impossible question. It's usually followed by more questions like, which genre or on what system? Not for me though. I answer straight away with the words Bubble Bobble. Not only for nostalgia's sake, but for me because it's got all the things a good game should. It looks great, is perhaps the purest gameplay experience around, and has tons of secrets and depth to it. I played our NES copy to death as a kid and have since bought the game and its many sequels, spin-offs and ports on any system I could get them for. Which is why I've always been quite saddened by the Game Boy version of Bubble Bobble, as, from a quick glance at the gameplay, I'm sure lovers of bubble-blowing brontosaurs will have wrinkled up their noses in disgust. Obviously, the game is not in colour, that one's a given, but Bubble Bobble is another example of a developer choosing big sprites over screen size, meaning you'll have to scroll around the level in search of bad guys and pickups by pressing the select button. When I initially got the game way back when, I sighed a deep sigh at this, but in all honesty, once you've gotten used to it, it's not the worst offender for this type of gameplay on the system. Another big issue a lot of people seem to have with the Game Boy port of the game is its lack of two-player mode that made the original great. Well, the game actually has some good reason for that. While the game might appear to be a straightforward port from the off, Taito positions this game as a pseudo-sequel to the original. When your brother Bob gets sick, Bub must journey into the Cave of Monsters once more. Not to save his girlfriend this time, but to retrieve some moon water to help your titular bubble dragon brother back to good health. But despite this new story, the game is very similar to the other versions of Bubble Bobble. The game's level design is mostly the same as the arcade original. The variety of food-based collectibles you eat to gain points doesn't change all too much, and all of the candy, crosses and other power-ups remain to help you on your journey. Then why is this a sequel, I hear you ask, other than the story? Well, what if I told you that Bubble Bobble for the Game Boy has bosses after every 25 levels, a full 2 years before Bubble Bobble Part 2? Sure, they're giant versions of existing enemies, but these three new bosses, Cream the Banabo, Jam the Mitre, and Choco the Higion, are all actually better fights than Super Drunk on the 100th level, making you collect an Easter Island head to grant Bob the power of projectile weaponry. Beating these bosses will see you freeing a spirit who will grant you an item and ask you to save their sisters. Freeing these spirits is vital to achieving the game's good ending, and you can mess this up if you don't go through the doors that appear once a boss is defeated. As it's so obvious though, it is actually more difficult in my opinion to get the bad ending than the good one, but there you go. After finally thwarting Super Drunk yet again on the 100th stage, you'll be treated to a nice little cutscene telling you how you not only saved Bob, but the rest of the world too. The real surprise here though is after the credits roll, in a similar vein to Kirby's Dream Land, you'll be given the password to unlock Expert Mode. This mode sees you play through the same 100 levels with different enemies and tougher bosses, and defeating it will grant you what I guess is the true ending after the credits. All that really changes though is the text, so unless you're up for the challenge, it's not really worth the effort. The one thing I couldn't figure out though is if the game contains secret rooms like the arcade and NES version. The back of the box alludes to them, but I honestly couldn't unlock any. If you know of any, leave a comment down below please, because it's really bugging me. Now on to the biggest problems of this game, because unfortunately there are some definite issues with this port. The biggest peeve I have is that the game seems to impose a fixed jump distance to Bub, meaning you'll not be able to jump to certain platforms, and it's easy to get trapped in spaces you'd usually be able to escape from in other versions. Not to mention, simply bubble jumping in later stages becomes a complete nightmare. Another troubling thing about this port is the popping of bubbles. For some reason, you'll have to hit the bubbles directly on top or below them, as hitting a bubble from an angle more often than not just pushes it around and doesn't pop it, which can be incredibly frustrating if you're inches away from good old Baron Von Blubber. And the screen tearing, Matt! Talk about the screen tearing, I hear you cry. Well, if I were playing this game on the original hardware, it would actually look incredibly smooth. You need to put the game into your DMG yourself to see this, as unfortunately not even capturing with my HDMI boy shows it off. But Taito did some really clever things with the bubble and power-ups in this game. Instead of putting them on the same levels as the sprites, they layered them instead on the background tile map, leaving chunky sprites in the foreground. This means that despite how many bubbles you blow or power-ups are on the screen, they don't really tear up that much, making it a smooth experience the same way everyone hails Zaz for doing. Be sure to check it out for yourself if you have a cart, as it's pretty impressive to look at. The final thing to note is, of course, the game has passwords. There are codes for each of the game's 100 normal and expert levels, not to mention some nice hidden codes to start with more lives, power-ups, and even one to access a sound test. As you know, I'm always big on password systems, but it's nice when they offer the player something a little bit extra. All in all, Bubble Bobble for the Game Boy is just shy of greatness. While it does offer a cute looking portable take on the arcade classic, the scrolling screen, jump mechanics and bubble breaking really let the port down. The bosses are a great new addition, and there's an incredible level of replayability offered by the expert mode. Top this off with impressive layering and decent renditions of the music, and it's really not a hard sell. Despite this being an incredibly common game though, be mindful that like most common NES titles, it's spiked in price as interest in the system has grown, and people have started to buy the games from series they're familiar with. Be sure, if you do see a copy, not to bet over the odds for it, as despite it being a pretty good game, its shortcomings have the potential to annoy even the most die-hard of Bubble Bobble fans. This sentiment goes double for the Game Boy Color game Bubble Bobble Classic, as despite the popular belief it's simply a colorized version of Taito's efforts, it's not. But we'll touch upon that another time. And that brings us to the end of another episode of Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. Sorry if I sound a bit stuffy, I have a serious cold while I'm recording this, but hey, we'll get through it. If you liked this video, be sure to check out some more of our Boyographic videos, some Boy Curious videos where I look at bootlegs and oddities, and follow me on Twitter at Gameboy. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't and share the channel around. But until then, more importantly, Game Boys and Girls, game on.